And joining me on the call today, I've got Brett Hansen from Hansen's. He's an accountant and he's been doing this for 25 years and he's been helping small business owners manage their finance and also be profitable. So, welcome to the call, Brett.
Thanks, David. Good to be on board with you today.
So, today's an interesting conversation, tactical advice for the current economy. And as everyone who's probably watching this video knows, right now the government is using the interest rate as a mechanism to govern inflation. But really, the poor business owners squeezed in the middle of all this, aren't they? And it's sort of like it's testing those people who've got any sort of war chest or any sort of get up and go because it's forcing the business owners to change how they do things. What's your view about the current economy? What's going on?
I'm really struggling to see where the current economy is at. Obviously, we've got increasing inflation
Yeah,
um, that I really see as a bit of false inflation at the moment. Well, it has been false inflation around increase of costs due to things like Ukraine, coming out of COVID and things like that. And it's really been from 9 to 12 months ago, not from currently what's going on at the moment, which is really frustrating myself from when you look at an RBA point of view, because the data that they're getting is still 6 to 12 months old. So I still see there's a bit of pain to come because I don't see that the interest rates are going to stop all of a sudden.
mm.
And costs are continuing to increase, starting to hit unemployment. I can see. So yeah, it's a real sort of what's going on here.
So I think rumor has it the reason the government keeps mandating these increases is to stop inflation. Can you explain from an accounting point of view how that even works?
Well, supposedly it's increase inflation so that people stop borrowing or reduce their borrowing so that they're not using that borrowing to spend, and also too that to put more of their household spend into having to pay off debt, and therefore they don't have as much to spend on lounges and holidays and TVs and
Gotcha.
all those goods that are supposedly in the basket of goods for inflation.
Yeah, gotcha. So I suppose one of the metrics they're using is unemployment figures because we're at an all-time low for unemployment. Um, do you think that's a valid way of measuring how this is working?
To be honest with you, David, there's a lot of different measures that should be looked at, and I think we're looking at too many individual measures.
Yeah,
Unemployment's really interesting at the moment because uh, there's we find even for ourselves, and I know a lot of clients are in this boat, is that they can't find people. So that would mean that the supply of people out there, which would mean low unemployment.
yeah,
But I know that there's a lot of people around that aren't fully employed, or don't want to work, or have come out of COVID and doing other things.
yeah.
So there's a mandate about bringing millions of people into this country over the next 5 years. But then you flow on, what does that do for employment? What does it do for housing? Where they're going to live?
Yeah.
And then what's the flow on effect again for inflation for that if more money's coming into the country?
So I suppose what we're seeing is fear, and people who are really saying we don't know where this is going to go, so we're going to start tightening our belts. We're going to start cutting costs. What's your view? We're talking about tactical advice for the current economy. What are your sort of top two or three things that you'd be suggesting to your clients right now?
Well, the first thing that I've always looked at for businesses, and both for ourselves and personal business, is a cash flow. And I think we've frozen a little bit. No, daily cash flow, and budgeting, and knowing exactly where you are from a cash point of view in your business, and that's not just today.
Mm.
It's looking forward next week, next month, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 12 months' time.
Yeah,
I myself prepare a daily cash flow for our business, that I know where we are 12 months in advance.
yeah,
A lot of it obviously is on thinking about, well, I don't know exactly what sort of revenue we're going to generate, and I don't know exactly what money we're going to get in the door, but you've got to do some presumptions. But a lot of it you do know what costs you've got, and that's the first thing at any time, and whether it's in a tough economy that what we've got at the moment or
Yep.
what we should have been doing 5 years ago is really understanding and planning where are we at here and what
Mm.
does it mean? When have I got BAS payments? When have I got
Yeah.
employee requirements? And does that look as though I've got a hole coming up? I've got increased potential loan repayments
Hmm.
and, all those sort of things. What am I looking at so that I can make decisions now
Yep.
about what's going to happen in 6 to 12 months' time?
Yeah.
And even from that, putting what ifs into it. What if
Yeah.
this happens? What if that happens? You know,
Yeah.
what if there's another 2% interest rate
Well, the thing
increase?
with cash flow, and you're spot on the money, I think every business should have a cash flow projection, and the tighter the funds, the more granular the cash flow projection. So down to daily if
Yeah,
things are tight. And then as things become more buoyant, you can then go to weekly and monthly. But for a lot of people, they're not even clear on the difference between a P&L or a budget and a cash flow projection.
yeah, correct.
And I suppose it's just timing, isn't it? It's really just when's the money coming in and when's the money going out.
Well, exactly right, because that then comes back to, you might invoice for a job, and, if you're just doing a plain profit and loss budget, you
Mm.
might invoice in June.
Mm.
But what are your trading terms with your clients? Are you not going to get paid? Are you going to get paid today? Are you going to get paid in 30 days' time?
Yeah.
You've got a lot of bigger businesses that they don't pay for 90 days, or governments. They might pay. They might be manufacturers, and they've got retentions that
Yeah.
they withhold 5 or 10% that they mightn't get for 1, 2, 3 years,
Yeah.
which all impacts, again, your cash flow and what you're generating in it. Because if you've only got a margin of 10% and you don't get that 10% for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, look, I've always said to people in business, cash is king.
Hmm.
And really, it's cash that feeds the machine. So having this idea of cash flow projections and really managing it to a point where you're always fluid
Mm.
really allows a business to take advantage of the current economy as well. Because I think the other thing that happens is when the economy tightens, there's an old philosophy called last man standing. I don't know if
Hmm.
you've heard about this, but typically in an industry, when things get tight, some people don't make it. And usually the reason they don't make it isn't because of the economy. They were hanging on by their fingernails just before it. So as soon as the turn occurs, there's nothing in the tank.
Yeah.
And so typically two things happen straight away. Once that company folds, all their customers now are looking for a new supplier, number one. And number two, all the employees that were loyal and never going anywhere are now unemployed. Now,
Hmm.
in this economy, they don't hang around long. So I think the preparedness of having cash flow projections and saying I've got a bit of a war chest and I know when I've got cash would allow a business to take advantage of some of those. And I know it
Yeah.
sounds a bit sort of cruel or mean, but business is a game, and I think that those people who don't have the buffer are going to be suffering during these times. And it doesn't mean we feel sorry for them. It's just that's the game, right?
Yeah.
And our job is to make sure our business has a buffer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about a buffer, David. Is that, and I've been doing this a lot with our clients over the last few years, is
Mm.
creating that buffer also in a separate entity,
Yeah.
so that we've got the ability to get any excess cash that we've got in the
Yes.
business, getting it out of the business, to put it aside for a rainy day, or to put it aside for those um, unknown bills, or even the tax that can't be paid at a certain period of time, so it's aside.
Yeah.
But it's also protected for the what if something happens to the business,
Uh-huh.
so that it is, we often use the term of we strip the reserves, but we strip it out of the trading entity. So if something happens to the trading entity, well, that buffer's protected,
Yeah.
and we can use it in other areas where we need it, that it's not caught up in if something happens. And look, we're hearing it day by day now, is that the building industry is a perfect example of all this now, where you talk about, the fact that they're just hanging on. A lot of these builders probably were just hanging on for the last 3, 4, 5 years,
Yeah.
and the increased costs that they haven't been able to factor for,
Yes.
the labour, all this type of thing, but also the flow-on effect. And this is where other businesses that have any sort of relation to the building industry, even think about just different subbies, or things like windows cleaners when it was COVID, and not a lot of people think about what are the flow-on effects of, well, if I've got any dealings at all with the building industry, how does that affect me, and what is it going to do to my business?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So really, like we've talked about two things. One is this idea of cash flow projections and granularity, and the second piece we've talked about is actually taking cash out of the bank and putting it somewhere safe.
Hmm.
Is there anything else that you think we should add in terms of tactical advice for right now?
I think there's always that it's time to tighten the belt.
Yeah,
Really look at, but look at both sides. Is looking at, well, where's my ability to not cut costs, but sharpen the pencil, get better deals. Even if it's as small as whether it's electricity, bank finance, anything like that. But on the flip side, well, what are the opportunities now
mm,
for me and my business, or you and your business, to say, well, okay, there's some businesses that haven't got through this phase. What can I do to then get into that market or get
yeah.
into that sphere, and to say, okay, well, grab that. There's still demand out there, but it's how does it get serviced, and who's going to do it? Well,
Yeah.
are we ready to step up and do that so that we can increase our own revenue?
So what you touched on here is what I call the difference between expense and investment.
Mm,
And for me, as a business owner myself, I look at every cent that goes out and say, what's my return on that cent?
yeah.
It's really weird, but wages, rent,
Hmm.
everything that we spend money on, we say, what's the return? Now, sometimes it's direct. Like if I've got contractors, it's easy. If I've got salespeople, it's easy. But if I've got admin people or an office or a printer, it's a little bit more obscured. But the point I'm making is that if I know what my return on investment is, and especially say in the marketing space, because one of the tendencies when people downsize is they say, let's cut our Google ad spend, let's cut our
Yeah.
sales reps, and you're sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face in that scenario. I'd almost go the other way and say, no, you should be doubling down on your sales. um,
And,
and
and that's where it is an investment, and that's where when we do stop, we cut those areas that are actually generating a revenue for us.
yeah,
Whereas we sit there and go, yeah, the office space or whatever. No, that's what we need to operate out of.
yeah,
But well, yeah, go and cut your marketing or your Google ads, but that's cutting your nose off to spite your face.
yeah. So I think the tactical advice is to go through the P&L with a fine tooth comb, really assess what the return on investment of every dollar is. Inevitably,
Mm,
you'll find some things like subscriptions that you're not using anymore. Those sorts of things need to be cleaned up. But more importantly, if you can see an area that's producing a good yield, maybe concentrate all the spend into that one area.
yeah. Yeah, and there's also can be areas where, and this is where dealing, whether it's through benchmarking or talking to people in the same industries or similar industries around, well, what do you do? What are some of those line items in your P&L that you actually don't have? Like that, you're spending money on that, but I'm not spending on money on that. But what's that getting you that I should be spending money on that,
Uh,
to then generate the next phase for you, and the next part of that again, that new opportunities or new market that could be
yeah,
open up for you.
gotcha. Because that's really a whole new perspective, and that's saying, well, there's things we don't even know to spend money on, and our tendency during tough times is to just not look at anything.
Mm,
And the risk with that is that, as we talked about before, if there's not much buffer in the business, battening down the hatches can be the worst thing to do. Because I've learned this through going through cycles like this 3 times or 4 times in my career. And you
mm,
watch that the most successful businesses were born out of recession.
yeah.
And it's because when everyone else is battening down, the person who sees and predicts what's happening in the marketplace can double down,
Mm,
and they will grab market share in a depressed market, which is a bargain. Because this happened during COVID when most advertisers pulled their advertising, the people who had advertising budgets said we should double down because the cost of advertising just went down. There's no
yeah.
competitor. So it's a matter of being aware enough. And I think, like when I look at business owners, I think they're so busy in the engine room doing the work that they don't see these opportunities because it's sometimes a bit late when the economy hits you. You should probably be thinking about it in advance and starting to say, well, what is going to happen in my industry?
mm,
Because
mm.
if you can predict the future, that's really the leader's primary objective, is to be able to read the play and predict what they think is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And not, a good example is not then going, I do need to cut costs. I've got to get rid of this person. I've got to get rid of this person. And then all that does is that you as a leader then fill that person's role and stops you from doing what you should be doing to see what's going on in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I often refer to it as, there's three stages in business growth. The first one is just getting control of the beast, because for
Mm,
most people, their business is just chaotic. The second stage is growth, and that's building the team and the marketing, so getting clients and serving them. And then the last stage is the leverage stage, where leadership occurs. And Michael Gerber said it years ago. He said, most people go into business because they have an entrepreneurial seizure. Right? They have a
yeah,
moment of inspiration, and then they spend the rest of their life paying for that moment. And the real problem is that they don't continue the entrepreneurial part. They just get stuck in the engine room.
yeah,
And I think what we're describing here today is, it might be sort of tough right now, but if you're not spending that time in leadership and reading the play of the market as these things occur, you're missing this opportunity to take advantage of it.
yeah, yeah. And look, it's very stressful at the moment for a lot of businesses, and
Yeah,
it's also trying to create that headspace to
yeah,
be able to look at those different things. So a lot of this can be non-financial. It's sitting there and going, I need to take a day, a few days, a week out of my business. How do I get out of my business to really sit back? And this is a perfect time of year for it
mm,
because we're leading into a new financial year. So
right,
sitting back and going, well, what am I going to do over the next 12 months that's going to change where I'm at the moment?
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
And what is that going to cost me in terms of dollars? Is it not going to cost me? What do I need to invest? As you said, David, is what do I need to invest so that in 12 months' time, I'm ahead of the curve. I've got that cash buffer. I've, got money in the bank that I'm not worrying about this, and I can help others as well.
yeah. It's interesting because what you're talking about, we used to do planning in 90-day cycles for people in business, and so every 90 days write a 90-day plan. And
Yeah.
what we realised is the economy moves so quickly now that 90 days is too long. So we've actually changed the cycle to 6 weeks, a 6 week
Okay.
planning cycle. And I find often people say, oh, my business plan's a bit out of date, or I haven't looked at it for a while. And for me, I compare it to a house, right? If I have a builder building the house, how often do they look at the plan, right?
Mm,
And the answer is pretty much every day, right?
yeah.
And so if I see a business that doesn't have a plan they're looking at least every week, all it's telling me is that the plan is not useful, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not telling us what to do this week. So
Yeah.
increasing the cycles is also saying, well, the economy is shifting. What do we do? What's
Mm,
our short-term plan? What's our tactical thing? What's the next 6 weeks look like for us? And
yeah.
6 weeks I found is long enough to do, maybe implement one or two elements, but short enough that if things change, you can adapt to it.
Yeah.
So
And that's the same from what we do with clients with budgets and
yeah,
those sort of things. That we don't just sit here now, do the budget for the next 12 months and not not monitor it, not work with it on, again, what's happening. We're the same. We're quarterly, but now we're bringing clients back to monthly and touching base. And it mightn't be full
yeah,
quarterly meetings, but it's touching base every month to say, okay, where are we at? This is what we anticipated. Is that going? Where are you going with that? What do we need to change? What
yeah.
do we need to act on now rather than waiting 12 months and going, oh, when we put the budget together last year, we said we are going to do this, but this didn't happen in September. Oh, but now it's June and it's a bit late now.
Mm, yeah. So super interesting. So I think, like, if we try and condense what we've talked about into some tactical things for people, the first thing you mentioned was cash flow projections. And if things are tight, get into tighter time frames. So instead of monthly, go weekly, go daily.
Yeah.
The second thing we touched on was really looking hard at your expense column in your P&L and just analysing what's expense, what's investment, and what needs to go
Mm-hmm.
and what needs to be enhanced. And then the last thing we touched on was this financial year budgeting idea, saying, well, it is a good time to reset and review and really say, well, based on the current economy, what's the next 12 months going to look like, and putting a budget together with
Yeah.
scenarios in it, I think you mentioned as well.
Yeah. Well, different scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if we don't get that contract? Yeah. What if it takes, again, the building game, the builds that might take 100 days and now taking 150 days because of getting labour and getting supplies. So, well, what impact does that have?
Yeah. Yep. So I suppose they're the three key elements, but was there anything that we need to layer on top of that? So what you've been working on with clients right now, is there any little tips or insights you wanted to throw in as a bonus for the listeners?
Oh, look, probably the next one is then, protecting all that and making sure that your structure is solid and secure, and protecting that wealth that you have built, be it in business or outside of business, is secure at the moment. That for those, what if something happens? What if someone has an attack at you or your business? And what if something happens to you? We're doing a lot of work with clients at the moment around succession and just personal protection around touch. What if something happens to you? What's the next step? Is someone there ready to replace you as a director or to run your business?
Yeah.
We call them successor directors. Is if something happens to you, David, is that tomorrow no one's officially allowed to run your business unless you've got something in place. So,
Yeah.
we talk about building this cash cow and building this business to be successful. But if something happens to me, well, what happens to the employees tomorrow?
Yeah, and that's probably a really important point. And I just, as you were saying that, it was sort of reminding me about something too. And now it's escaped my mind. But we were talking about structures, we were talking about succession, we were talking about this whole idea of having buffers. This is one of the little tips that I picked up many years ago, and it's called a profit account.
Yep.
And this idea of a war chest, for some people, it's quite difficult to say, well, how do I put money aside when I don't have any?
Mm.
And I remember reading a book called Profit First, and he sort of touched on this, but it also came out of The Richest Man in Babylon. And it said, just take a percentage of your profit or your revenue, and even start with 1%, and put it into a irreversible deposit account that you have no access to online. So I just thought to myself, imagine if we took 1% of a business's revenue every month and just said, gone. And all it does is it fills this war chest. Because 1% doesn't
Yeah.
sound like much. And most people, they would survive that month with 1% less in the money coming in. But until we make it a discipline, we end up working on what's called leftover rather than budgeting for a profit. So it just sort of reminded me of this idea of, people in business need to pay themselves first, because wealth creation 101 is pay yourself first. But most business owners pay themselves last, which means they get what's left of the month if there is any. And it's a simple discipline, because it's just about saying at the start of the month, I know that I'm going to take a percentage out from last month's revenue and it's going into a one-way dollar. And we have to work out how to survive on the rest. And all we're really doing is building that buffer, because we've talked a lot about this idea of having cash in the bank, having that ability to make decisions when everyone else can't. Because I know even in the property market, it's gone through crazy growth in the last 2 years, right? But now with the banks doing this interest rate thing, all of a sudden there's not as many buyers as there used to be.
Yeah.
But the people with cash are now going to start being able to get some good deals. That's about preparation. So having that war chest and almost forcing yourself into investing into a profit account is something that should have been from day one.
Yeah, well, exactly right, and that's that. As you say, it's that forced savings or forced buffer, and as much as you can keep it outside of the trading entity, the better. It's like superannuation, isn't it? We've gone from an environment of no super now up to within a few weeks it's going up to 11%, and it's forced into that area that as business owners we've had to then manage that within our profitability in our business, and that is that forced saving, and it's it's and look, that I still talk to people, and one of my, I suppose, catchphrases or people know me by is if you're paying tax, you're making money, and I think too many people still might use that buffer account to go and buy, and especially at the moment, probably over the next couple of weeks, go and buy the car to get a tax deduction. But do you really need the car? You've just gone and spent 50 grand on something that, okay, the government's going to help you out with 12 and a half. It still costs you 37,500 for something you probably don't need.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, because even before the call, we were talking about that end of financial year, and you said, I want to talk about that. Because I've always learned this. Every time my accountant says, you should put your expenses in before end of financial year, pull them forward from next year, I go, you can only do that once. because
Yeah, it's all. Yeah,
pinching from Peter to pay Paul, right? And I
mm,
think it's sort of focusing on the wrong end of the equation, because the business owner, going back to the leadership idea, is how do I grow the business, not how do I cut my costs? Because
yeah,
cutting your costs has a finite end, where growing a business is infinite.
yeah.
So I think you're on the money with that, saying, well, don't do things for a tax saving.
But too
Don't,
too many businesses I see go to ground because they're worried about not having a profit at the end of the year because they don't want to pay tax.
yeah.
As
Just
against, well, if that's going to be the case, you're also going to have no money.
So the idea is to pay as much tax as, well, not as much tax as possible, as much
Hey,
tax as that's
there's
legally.
ways and means around, legitimising not paying tax or paying
Yeah,
as little as possible. And I know there's, what was it, 66 billionaires or multi-millionaires that aren't paying tax at the moment, or even 40. There's also ways and means of different um, not paying tax in 1 year. Like, there's
yeah,
stories that go around, but
yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm always about, if you can make $1 million, how much you got left over after you pay the tax? I mean, could be still 750, and that's being straight line.
And that's going back to your sort of comment on superannuation. Like, really, it's just a tax shelter,
Mm,
right? And so if you're profitable and you push it through super, you're actually paying less tax. So
yep,
forced
most
savings at a
most
reduced tax rate.
most tax effective vehicle we've got in Australia is
Yeah,
super, and the only thing is we can't touch it for a while. But that's again that forced savings for when we may need it in the future.
not so long for me. I don't know about you. When my
No, no, it's
accountant said
getting
to me,
close.
Dave, we're going to start doing your superannuation planning to pay yourself out, I'm going, what are you talking about? And he goes, oh,
No, it's getting closer, and but also too, while it's forced saving, it's also forced protection because super's one of those things that's protected in
yeah,
bankruptcy and liquidations and that sort of thing. So
yeah, yeah. So to me, like, making sure that there's profitability in the business, taking the money out when it comes in, and paying yourself
yep,
first is one of the fundamental principles of wealth creation. It should be applied to every business.
yeah, but also, David, with that, paying yourself first in terms of not ripping the business blind to pay yourself.
Yeah,
So paying your wages and those sort of things, but don't then go and take another 200 grand out just because you want to go and buy the boat or whatever. If the business can't afford that, well,
yeah,
then you got to keep yourself. I would always talk to clients about you play three different hats. You're a director, and you've got responsibilities as a director. You're a shareholder, and you're an employee.
yeah,
So when you're doing this stuff, what hat are you wearing?
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that's an important perspective as well. Because yeah, you're on the money. We shouldn't be pulling money out, paying ourselves first when there's no money to pay the wages.
Yeah,
So that three levels of responsibility becomes really important in that decision making as well.
yeah, yeah,
It's been a good discussion, Brett. I hope for the listeners they've got some ideas around how they can get an advantage in this economy. Because I don't think it matters whether the economy is growing or dying. I think it's what you do in your business to accommodate what's happening with the economy that makes a difference.
yeah. Exactly. If you're smart in your business, like there's a lot of good businesses out there, and there's a lot of businesses that are just getting ripped apart. But often it's not that they're getting ripped apart by the economy. Sometimes they're ripping themselves apart.
Yeah,
So to really sit back and look at who they are, what they are in business, and what does that mean for both the short term and long term.
yeah, fantastic.
Mm.
Brett, thanks so much for your time today. It's been really helpful. And if anyone needs to contact you, you're pretty easy to find. The good
Yeah,
looking Brett Hansen online. Hansen's
Hanson's pretty
Hansen.
easy to find us.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again for your time today.
Thanks, David. Appreciate being on.